Hello everyone, it's Channin here for Pinkfresh Studio. In today's video, we'll be creating these two cards. It's actually a 2-for-1 project. These cards feature the new Hibiscus Washi sets. Now, we're not actually going to be using the washi tape. I'm going to share with you a lot of techniques and tips for getting the most out of your layering stencils and really creating some bold, vibrant, impactful images. We're going to start our project with the Hibiscus Washi Stamp Set. As you can see, this is a long stamp set and it doesn't quite fit in the original MISTI. So I'm going to use this really awesome hack of kind of using the front door of the MISTI. So I have my MISTI half kind of taped down, but the front or the lid of the MISTI is able to open and shut. And I have my piece of paper taped down to my work surface just so it doesn't shift on me, placed the stamp over that paper. Now I'm going to heat emboss, so I did apply some anti-static powder. Now I'll ink up my stamp with VersaMark ink. After I've inked it up, I'll just fold it over and stamp it. I'm going to use a cloth here just to easily glide over and get pressure over the whole stamp, and this is a really great method for stamping these larger images. And because my MISTI is taped down, I can actually stamp this twice just to ensure I get enough of that VersaMark ink or that embossing watermark ink down, and so my embossing powder sticks and I have a really good impression. I do recommend for when you're working with layering stencils to do a heat embossed look or heat embossing, just because it really protects the intensity of the outlines. Even if you're doing black, I would recommend kind of stamping in black and then stamping with VersaMark over and then doing some clear embossing powder. This will really help to make sure that those impressions are really crisp and will really add to the overall look of your image. We obviously did gold here. Now that I've heat embossed this, I'm ready to move on to the Hibiscus Washi layering stencils. There's 6 stencils in this set. I'm going to do them in order, starting with stencil 1. Just going to line it up here with the images, use a couple pieces of tape to hold the stencil in place, and now I'm ready to ink blend. Starting with bubblegum, I'm going to lightly ink blend most of the flowers here, most of the hibiscus, with this beautiful pink color. After I get kind of a nice light pink base, I'll then kind of ink blend the centers a little bit darker with that bubblegum to kind of create a little gradation. These little gradations that you add using ink blending and the stencils really help to add depth to these stenciled images. Now I grabbed a darker shade, which is Raspberry Bliss, and just enhanced that gradation a little bit more, kind of got more contrast. Now we're moving on to a red combo, starting with Passion Fruit, quickly ink blending the remaining flowers with Passion Fruit, and then I'm going to grab a darker shade. This is Berrylicious, and I'm going to ink blend again a little gradation over these red flowers to really add some more depth to the images. Now we're on to stencil 2. I'm going to line this up. This is kind of the detail layer for all the flowers we just ink blended. Once it's lined up, I'm going to grab my same colors I used before, starting with bubblegum for the pink flowers, just going really heavy-handed with this pink now to get some of that contrast, and then some more Raspberry Bliss for the very centers to kind of create a second gradation, but darker than the first gradation we did with the first stencil. Now we're moving on to the red flowers, starting with Passion Fruit, more heavy-handed with that shade, and then Berrylicious, again a little bit more of it and more intensity, so we have more contrast between those two layers with the two stencils. Now we're moving on to stencil 3, starting off with Marigold, just quickly ink blending this beautiful kind of yellow orange over all those flowers. Then I'm moving on to Clementine and adding a little gradation, so a little bit of that orange to kind of add a little bit more contrast. And then we'll move on to the next stencil, stencil 4. Now this is the detail layer for all those yellow orange flowers. And for this time, I'm just sticking with the Clementine and just ink blending really heavy-handedly the centers of the flowers. And that will create some nice contrast, but still have that beautiful gradation with that first stencil for those flowers. Now we're moving on to some of the leaves, starting with Seaside. So I have a lot of colors picked out. Some of my leaves are going to be blue. So Seaside is my light blue shade. And then I'm going to move on to a darker blue, which is Blue Jay here, and just add a little gradation at the top of the leaves, a little bit more of that intense color so that they pop a little bit and have a little shape. Now we're moving on to our next green combo for some of the leaves. This is Key Lime, just ink blending kind of a base with the key lime. And after I ink blend that base, I'll then go on to my darker shade, which is Olive, and ink blend just the top of these leaves, kind of where they would meet the stem, with that olive color to create a gradation. Now we're moving on to mint for all the remaining leaves. This is kind of a beautiful kind of almost pool teal kind of color. And then moving on to Emerald City for our dark to create that little gradation. And boom, wow, it's so amazing how much the colors of the leaves really change the look of these beautiful floral images. Now we're moving on to our last stencil. This is the detail layer for the leaves, starting with Blue Jay for all my blue leaves to add that dark, intense kind of color or shadows, and then Emerald City for all of my teal leaves. Just going to use that dark from my combo earlier, and then olive for the last remaining kind of, oh gosh, I guess real green, Kelly green kind of leaves. And here is the finished look. I'll hold this up to the camera so you can see. They're so bold and beautiful. They almost look like I colored them with Copics. I just love adding those gradations with your stencils, or when you're ink blending with your stencils. It just adds so much depth. So I went ahead and die cut these out with the Hibiscus Washi coordinating die. And now I'm going to move on to some foiling. So I have the awesome new Nested Diamonds foil set here. I'm going to grab the largest one for that set it on my glimmer machine, set the timer. Once it's ready to go, I'll then detach my platform, grab my foil. I'm using polished brass, lay down my white cardstock, and then my shim and my plate. And then I'll just run it through my die cutting machine, and we'll have a beautiful foiled diamond frame. Now I'm going to move on and actually foil the remaining foil. So I have the solid hot foil plate, set that on machine, set the timer. Once it's ready, I'll detach, place my foil down from leftover from before, of course shiny side down, then another piece of cardstock, and then my shim and my top plate, and I'll run it through my die cutting machine. Here we'll be left with all that remaining foil, and that's going to be really helpful for creating our second card. So now I'm going to use the nested diamond die here, and I'm going to use the largest die to first die cut out basically kind of that solid foiled diamond. So I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine, and we're left with this. Now I have the scrap that I saved. I'll need that later to the side. Now we're going to use the next largest die and die cut a window in this panel, which I did actually trim down to an A2 panel off camera. Now we have one more cut we got to do. I got to die cut this the solid foil with the second largest die to create a frame, but save this solid scrap here. We're going to use that actually to create our sentiment. So I have it here in my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment on top of it. Now once I stamped it on, because the stamp is kind of sticky, it did pull off some of the gold, but it doesn't matter because we're going to stamp over it. I inked it up in VersaMark ink, and now I'm just going to dip it into some white embossing powder and then heat set with my heat tool. And I thought this was a really cool trick that you could actually heat emboss over your foil. It's going to be a really great way to incorporate that gold through our whole design. So now we're going to move on to ink blending a background. I have an A2 top folding white card base here. I'm going to start ink blending the top with Raspberry Bliss. This ink blended background is actually going to go with that windowed panel that we just created before the sentiment. Now moving on to Marigold, ink blending kind of the center with this color, also creating a little gradation with it. And then we'll move on to Berrylicious. And these were actually the same colors that we used earlier for the flowers, just bringing those into the background. That'll just make everything really go together. After I ink blend some of that Berrylicious, I decided to add some orange, so I grabbed Clementine and just ink blended it a little bit between that transition of the Marigold and the Berrylicious. And that will finish my background. So we're actually ready to bring our cards together. I have my ink blended top folded card base, and I also have a second white top folded card base. I'm going to go ahead and remove this foam adhesive that I added to the back side of our windowed panel and just stick that down, and it beautifully frames that ink blended background we created. Now I have our second frame here, and I ink blended this remaining white scrap from die cutting that windowed frame, and I just added some liquid adhesive to the back of it, centered it in that frame that we had kind of turned upside down, and now I'm going to just remove the foam adhesive on the back side of this foiled frame and place that around that ink blended diamond. Now we're going to finish up this card with some of our flowers that we ink blended. I'm just going to kind of arrange them here and stick them down with some foam adhesive. So I'm just cutting little pieces here for these beautiful leaves and just making a nice kind of two-part arrangement framing that gorgeous foiled diamond. Once we have those leaves in place here, we're ready for the sentiment. So here's the sentiment that I stamped on the foil earlier, and I just fussy cut around it and just added some foam adhesive, some doubled up foam adhesive, and centered it in that diamond. Now we're going to move on to our second card. Doubled up some foam adhesive here so these flowers really pop. Place them down inside that diamond. I'm going to add a couple more floral images, kind of fill it out a little bit more. And then a second sentiment. I actually made this sentiment with the remaining scrap from the solid diamond. A little bit of scrap that I had left over on this large panel I just stamped, and fussy cut that out as well. And after I stick that sentiment down, I am done with both my cards. I'll hold up to the camera here so you can get a good look at all the details. I love the way these turned out. They're so bright and cheery. These flowers in the Hibiscus Washi sets are so gorgeous, and I loved being able to use some really bright and bold colors. The gradations that we were able to achieve with the stencils and ink blending really adds a lot of depth and interest to these flowers. They almost look like I Copic colored them. I hope you guys enjoyed today's cards and video. If you have any questions about the products I used, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.